To be a farmer and make it, you got to be innovative in order to survive in this industry. You're very dependent on the weather. You're very dependent on what Mother Nature wants to bring you.
They kind of said, if you dream it, we can make it happen. So I'm like, well, I got all kinds of dreams, so let's see what we can do.
If we lose these farms, we lose our food security. Every time a piece of land goes out of production, it's heartbreaking because we can never replace that land. That land becomes a subdivision, it becomes a strip mall. And to keep these farms here, they have to be economically viable.
The commercial side of rural America doesn't have that access to the data and the applications and the infrastructure that could help them become a lot more efficient. The stuff we take for granted is not something that these farmers get to enjoy because in many cases, they're just precluded from access to the internet.
In that opening clip, you heard from farmers in Snohomish County, Washington, talking about the challenges they face in their industry of agriculture. Issues such as population growth and climate change are seriously affecting their yields. Earlier this year, in conjunction with Snohomish County, the 5G Open Innovation Lab announced the Food Resiliency Program, which harnesses technologies such as 5G, drones, edge compute, to name a few, to make farming more efficient. In fact, the 5G Open Innovation Lab is creating some of the most fascinating and innovative solutions that will change the way we live our lives. Now, Amdocs is a founding partner of this initiative, and today's episode will be dedicated to the 5G Open Innovation Lab and some of the leaders of the organizations that are part of this incredible collaboration. Welcome to The Great Indoors, a podcast where we look at the lasting technological changes brought about by the pandemic and how technology can potentially help solve the other challenges facing humanity. I'm your host, Matt Roberts, and joining me is my co-pilot and producer, Larissa Yee. And I can't believe it, today is the 5th in our special MWC LA bonus episodes. We are coming to you from Mobile World Congress, Los Angeles. And over the last week, we have had a recording studio on prominent display at the event, and we have had amazing conversations already with some of the industry's leading figures. So today's common red thread with all our guests is the 5G Open Innovation Lab, and I'm joined by Jim Brisimitzis, the CEO and founder of the 5G Open Innovation Lab, Michael Anderson, the CEO of Expeto Wireless, Ben Posthuma, the head of product at GenXComm, and James Kimery, the vice president of product management at Spirent. So I'd like to welcome you to The Great Indoors today. So our next guest on The Great Indoors today is actually the first guest who's come back and done a second episode, because the first episode was an absolute sizzler. I think that's fair to say. And actually, it's the first time I've actually met Jim in person. The last podcast was done over the old video conferencing software. So I'd like to welcome to The Great Indoors today the founder and the head, the CEO of the 5G Open Innovation Lab out of Seattle, Jim Brisimitzis. How are you doing, Jim?
I'm doing great, Matt. And it's a pleasure to actually get to meet you in person for the first time.
Yeah, likewise. Now, when we spoke last back in, I think it was February, wasn't it? Because it was cold.
It was.
There was some really interesting things happening out of the 5G Open Innovation Lab. In fact, when we did that podcast, we just did the press release with the Food Resiliency Program in Snohomish County. And Amdocs is a partner with you guys up there in the lab. Partners. And it's amazing what you're doing there in the lab, Jim. So what's happened between February and now? Because there's been lots of news, there's been lots of new partners, there's been lots of startups. Give us a quick rundown of everything that's happened since we last spoke.
Well, we moved forward with, at the time it was batch 3, just after we had our first podcast. And now we're literally in the middle of batch 4. So we've had 59 teams now come through the program since we launched in 2020. We've had 3 of those teams actually be acquired, the latest being Mixcom that announced their acquisition from Seaver Semiconductor about 2 weeks ago, and 2 others before that, and a bunch of fundraising as well. So on the startup front, the teams that we've had a chance and privilege to work with have been really, really fantastic. We've added some new partners as well, Spirent, Ericsson. We're announcing a couple of new partners, which I can't say just yet, but we'll be announcing them later on today. And then, of course, you know about the Food Resiliency Project, which was really an opportunity for us to create our own private 5G network and really do what we think is amazing, actually, to use some of Amdocs' latest
latest
marketing.
strapline.
Yeah, and we always felt at the lab that the opportunity for 5G was bigger than connectivity. Connectivity is sort of a given in many respects, and we really wanted to explore what happens when you fuse connectivity with computing on the edge, and that's what the Food Resiliency Project has been for us. In fact, about a month ago, and Amdocs actually wrote about this in a joint blog with ourselves and Microsoft and other partners, that we actually ran a drone test where we were collecting live video data and photo data and actually processing that data on our on-site edge before moving it to an Azure application. And so that's pretty fantastic. In the grand scheme of things, when you think about this opportunity ahead for carriers and for enterprises, the closer you get to the software ecosystem, the bigger the value opportunity is long term, and that's exciting for us. On the farm itself, in both of them, we've deployed some specialized irrigation equipment and some other capabilities there. Where at one of our farms, Swan Trails, they've already reduced their water footprint by up to 75%, just because they're accessing real-time IoT data. They're collecting LiDAR data and amassing all that to have a better perspective on the health of their crops. And what we help them determine that they were actually over-irrigating and putting more chemicals than necessarily. And as a result, this year, their crop value was much higher than years past.
All right. So it's really, I think it's fascinating what the lab is producing, Jim, because we were in Denver several weeks ago and we heard Neville Ray from T-Mobile. And he said the three things about 5G, he said for T-Mobile, is fixed wireless access, rural coverage, and enterprise, right? But didn't really allude into some of those enterprise use cases. And we had Sampath, the CRO of Verizon earlier. He talked big about fixed wireless is their first real use case that they're pushing on 5G. What is it that I remember asking you this question back in February, but I want to see what's changed. What to you now is the big driver from what you're seeing for 5G use cases in which verticals?
So first, from a segmentation perspective, the biggest opportunity, in my humble opinion, is the enterprise. If you look at the total revenue across all carriers globally, as of the latest numbers that I've seen from 2020, on average, global carriers at mass are bringing in about $1.2 trillion a year in revenue. There are 6 vendors on the planet today that generate more than that: Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and Apple. So there's this big separation between where value's created and where value's realized. And I'm not suggesting that connectivity has no value. It obviously has a very big, valuable part, but ultimately it's a means to connect to applications, a means to harvest data, and so on and so forth. And so when we looked at the opportunity in the enterprise space, according to several analysts, the opportunity is quite large. It's about $6.8 trillion will be spent by enterprises who are moving digital. Right. Meaning that they're going to increase their dependency on IoT, increase their dependency on big data, AI, augmented reality, all of the things we hear about at shows like this. And really what's driving that are applications and software. And we wanted to go and explore that opportunity as a sort of a big opportunity. So do I think that fixed wireless and those opportunities are real? Yes, obviously. But when you look at where a lion's share of the wallet revenue is going to go, there's a portion that goes to connectivity, and then there's a fairly big portion that goes to the software world. And that's that divide that we're very much focused on really exploring and exploiting longer term. And that's where we have had a lot of fun working alongside our founding partners like Amdocs, but also working hand in hand with enterprise startups, right? Yes, teams that have raised collectively, of the 59 teams that we've worked with, they've all raised over $524 million, which is fantastic if you think about only running this program for about 2 years.
Yes, yeah.
So that's really that cross-section of opportunity. And in my humble opinion, it's also a place where the carriers in this 5G realm have a place to reimagine their value and their position in the broader ecosystem.
And Sampath echoed that this morning when we spoke to him, but he also said the magic is going to happen at the edge. Right,
He's absolutely correct.
We hear this over and over again. That's the thing at the moment. If we looked at the old Gartner hype cycle, edge compute would be right up there. I think everybody's talking about it. What's your opinion? What's your position on edge compute now, and what it can deliver, and how you're harnessing that in your lab environment?
Edge compute is going to be the differentiation in the cloud. You're seeing all the hyperscalers make phenomenal progress in those regards. In fact, I think it was about 2 weeks ago as well that AWS announced that they were actually setting up a dedicated edge product team, which I think brings together Outpost and Wavelength and some other properties. And of course, Microsoft's done extremely well in this space as well. So on the hyperscaler front, it's a foregone conclusion. The edge is significant. On the startup front that we've had a chance to work with, there's both startups who are building edge capabilities and there's startups that are building applications that are going to rely on the edge quite heavily. That's where the spending power is. And they're solving problems for large enterprises. That's where the spending power is. So Sam was absolutely correct. My question to Sam and the rest in the telco industry is what role do you want to play in that?
Yeah.
And how involved do you want to allow your networks to play in that? And it goes beyond just throwing SIM cards into devices, IoT sensors, drones, autonomous vehicles, and really speaks to this opportunity about potentially exposing network services as edge computing services where your value increases. That said, that's in the macro network. We talked in our February podcast around the emerging opportunity in private cellular networking. And back then I was saying, I feel like this is a real market, but time will tell. And now it's been several months later. I'm more assured now that this is a real market opportunity where enterprises are fundamentally looking at private cellular networks, in some cases collaborating with traditional telcos, in other cases not. Going straight forward.
Now you said the service providers have to decide what role they want to play in this. What role do you think they should play?
I think they need to get into the software game.
Yeah.
And I think that there is an emerging opportunity for them to collaborate quite closely with the hyperscalers who ultimately see this opportunity on the edge as well to share resources and access where the applications that start running on the edge could be accelerated and run on a carrier's edge and then eventually accelerated into a cloud edge as well, or a public cloud instance. That's the world that I think is really where the value is going to be created.
Now, one of the other things, we talked about the food resiliency program. We talked about the recent use case with the drone, taking the images, transmitting them in real time. We talked about fixed wireless. The other area that the service providers talk about, and rightly so, is their responsibility to society. So fixed wireless can help bridge the digital divide.
Yep.
We've seen a reliance in society on technology through remote education, through telemedicine. From your perspective, what is the biggest societal issue that 5G, edge, everything that you're doing in the lab could potentially address?
That's a fantastic question. I think, and it's not necessarily rooted in 5G, it's just connectivity. I think rural connectivity in any country around the world today suffers quite a bit. And not just the citizens who are out in rural areas not having the connectivity, but even industry. And in fact, here in the United States, in last year's CBRS auction, if you followed that, it was $4.2 billion sold of CBRS spectrum. And some of that went to big industries like utilities, oil and gas in the case of Chevron, to essentially provide coverage for remote areas where they're operating. So I think the societal benefit of that is actually quite high. In some cases, though, and I'm actually impacted by this, my family and I are fortunate enough to have a cabin that's about 85 miles southeast of Seattle in the mountains. We have a fiber connection to the home, ironically enough, with 100 megs down, and that plan cost me $110 a month. I have a gig circuit to my home in Kirkland, Washington, and that plan costs us $60 a month. So there's an economic disadvantage for just being 85 miles outside of a city core.
Yeah.
And so while it's good to say, hey, we'd like to enable connectivity to rural America or rural anywhere in the world, the economics actually don't play in those favors as well. And so what I'd hope to see is over time that connectivity's price to value becomes such that really, truly, not only can you provide connectivity, but those who are now able to connect can connect in an affordable way.
And do you think there's a responsibility on government to step in and assist or help or subsidize the service providers in bridging that economic gap?
In some cases they have. Like if you look at, I forget the town. I think it's Chattanooga, but it's one of the towns it's called Gig City because every home has a gig connection, and that's because the city and the utilities actually took advantage of many government grant programs and used those to their favor. And from that standpoint, I would say absolutely they're subsidized. In fact, the ISP that I use at my cabin also built their fiber network off the back of grants and such that are provided through the FCC and other programs. That doesn't negate the fact, though, that I'm still paying $40 a month for 1/10 the service of what I'm getting at my home in Kirkland. So perhaps there's some regulation that has to happen at the federal level or the state level that could price cap some of this so that folks who are in rural areas can affordably access the internet. Today, if a family can only afford, let's say, $40 to $50 a month for the connectivity around my cabin, that's DSL at best, and that's 6 megs down at best. So that I think you're right. And I do think that government has a role to play in that. I'm also from Canada, as you know, so maybe that's my social tendencies pulling there a little bit.
There you go. Well, here's a controversial question.
Go for it.
Okay, so we talked about it this morning. The events that have come back, when the service providers have got on stage, there's this race to 5G. This is one of the biggest, as far as I'm concerned, business stories of modern times, this race to roll out these 5G networks. We saw the C-band auction where Verizon finally went in and managed to get enough mid-band spectrum to start competing with T-Mobile, who had taken it all through Sprint. We see them having pops at each other in the press, some of it fun. And who do you think out of the service providers in the United States is best equipped to succeed in this race? And let's not forget the cable MVNOs that are in the mix as well. Who right now, if you were a betting man and they were horses, where would your money go? Controversial one. And I'm having a look to see if there's anybody batting an eyelid at that one.
Yeah, no. Where I would place my money is where a service provider is absolutely making big bets on the enterprise. As a consumer of 5G services, obviously I'd like my service, but honestly, in my humble opinion, the revenue opportunity long-term is not going to be on the consumer side. It's all going to be in the enterprise. So any service provider that's really doubling down on enterprise, whether it's in private future 5G networks, whether it's in edge capabilities, whether it's in transforming their services and their value to enterprise and to the software ecosystem, is where I put my bets. And I've seen a number of different players, from a Rakuten to Reliance Jio to even a Dish here in the United States. We're not only going cloud native with their network architectures from day one, but in the case of Dish, and I don't want to quote them entirely, but I believe that they're looking at the enterprise context is just as interesting and important to them as their consumer play as well.
Yeah.
So that's where I would make the bet generally, because I think that honestly is where the big dollars are going to be longer term. It's great that we all have fast. In fact, I'm patiently waiting for this Friday to get my hands on a Google Pixel 6 Pro.
Nice.
Which will be my first 5G phone. But I struggle to see the long-term potential in terms of wowing me as a consumer relative to the commodity pricing today of services to where the enterprise is going. Because the spending power, according to Gartner, every year, including last year, enterprises at mass spent about $3.4 trillion in IT. That's 3 times more than what all the global carriers make in a year.
Yeah.
You can't ignore those numbers.
Yeah. Well, something that I thought was maybe superfluous, and I saw it in the big 5G in Denver, and it's on the agenda here, is people already talking about 6G. Is that too early?
Yeah. I mean, we're not even close to 5G, guys.
I know.
We're not. I don't, and I could be very wrong. I don't know if we've actually moved to standalone 5G with any of the carriers at scale, like at the country level. I know there's instances of standalone 5G in the networks, but I haven't seen it. And we certainly have not seen at scale millimeter wave, which is truly what differentiates 5G from 4G in terms of speeds, performance, and latency and all that fun stuff. So we're not there yet.
No.
I'm not a standards individual, but my sense is that 6G will likely be an evolution of 5G and what we've learned in 5G implemented in 6G. Yeah. I'm curious to see where the standards go relative to offloading data pipes into edge computing and all that other fun stuff. But we have looked at 5G as a thesis because of the software opportunity. We're also looking at decoupling the 5G from the Open Innovation Lab, not because it's not interesting or important, but it sort of ties you to one wave of of connectivity in 5G, and it doesn't really appreciate kind of where the future of enterprise technology is going. It's certainly on the edge.
No, excellent. So I'm going to give you a little challenge here, Jim, because it's the second time. This is the second time we've spoken, and I'm going to invite you back for a third episode.
So am I the first to have 2 episodes?
You're the first one.
And then you're not doing that just because I'm from Toronto like you are.
That's why I initially thought about it, just giving you a bit of Canadian brotherly love.
Thank you.
So if we have it, if we have you back in 6 months, make a prediction now, and we're going to test that prediction when we bring you back.
6 months.
Yeah.
6 months, we are going to show in the lab a mock telco actually generating revenue on the edge with a whole host of use cases running with our startups, delighting enterprise customers, and showing that pathway. And that's more than a prediction. That's a goal that we have set up. Yeah. And too early to say anything now, but we are very, very close to actually enabling that as something. And that, I think, will be a turning point for the industry where they can start to really realize the assets and the networks that they built are actually fundamentally valuable. It's just how you look at the opportunity.
Okay, well, you heard it here first. We're going to test that out in season 4.
6 months.
6 months.
I'll buy you some Timmy's if I'm wrong. But in all seriousness, we've done a lot, and with our friends at Amdocs, and I'm not just saying that because I'm in a booth with you recording a podcast, but Amdocs has really, really leaned in a big way in this opportunity, and so there's likely to be lots more collaborations for us to talk about.
No, it's great, and it's one of the most innovative and exciting things I think we're a part of right now. Thank you. It's really great, and great to have you here, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon, Jim.
Yes, thank you for having me again. I appreciate it.
Take it easy.
Of course.
Okay, so my next guest today on The Great Indoors, joining us is Michael Anderson, the CEO of Expeto. Welcome to The Great Indoors, Michael.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. And tell us a little bit about Expeto.
Yeah, so Expeto is really a company where our core purpose is to enable enterprise customers to consume 5G according to their mission-critical business needs. Mm-hmm. And I say that, and I'll emphasize the enterprise and what we say quite often is enterprise first. And by no means do I mean to be critical of what we would call kind of telco-first solutions, but we were really inspired by the enterprise as we looked at 5G and really the reach, the speed, and the scale, and really applying that in the enterprise context, if it's in the factory driving manufacturing and supply chains or robotics or in the hospitals. And so we built a software-based application, really a platform as a service, where we're enabling the enterprise for the first time. And when I say enterprise, I mean kind of medium to large size that typically have multiple locations, transnational, multinational. And first and foremost, we allow them to use kind of any combination of 5G public connectivity or deploying private, but taking those multiple networks and really creating a single WAN. That's number one.
Yeah.
The number two thing is we allow them to seamlessly integrate that into their IT systems. So now from a CIO's perspective, it's their topology, their security, their IP addresses. And that's kind of an industry first, right? That they're allowed to really extend their existing networks with 5G or really any 3G PP network, 4G, LTE, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then the final thing, which if we think about why are we doing this? Why are we establishing this networks? Why are we censoring everything? It really is that data, right? It's the data that allows us to take timely and valuable action. And so the third and final thing is we allow them to control the end-to-end data path, really that data routing. And a lot of times, especially with public networks, that data will kind of trombone around according to really the way the network is set up. And what we do is we allow them to egress it right out of the network into their environment, which is really valuable.
So basically what you're doing is you're giving the control back to the enterprise.
Absolutely. I couldn't say it better myself. The control is in their hands, right? Yeah. Which is, if you're an enterprise and we're asking these guys, hey, listen, put your mission critical processes on these networks. And we can't ask them to do that without putting the control in their hands.
Yeah.
And that's fundamentally what we're doing.
So you're giving them control of their security, you're giving them control of the routing, but more importantly, you're giving them the control of that data. Right?
Exactly. Control of their network in their domain, their systems, which is very empowering and exciting. And as you know, I think that, you know, some people might get grumpy with me if I say, you know, the network is really meaningless. It's about the work the network is enabling you to do.
Yeah.
And we're all about the outcomes and the applications. Yeah. And those are only possible if the enterprise is able to kind of have that control and kind of the integrated network, compute, and application working together, you know, within their mission critical processes where we say minutes mean millions, right?
Yeah. And we're obviously partners in the 5G Open Innovation Lab. Tell us a little bit about the work that we've done together, and there was some really interesting stuff with the drones that we were all a part of recently. Give us an insight into that, Michael, if you could.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. There's the wonderful thing. I feel very fortunate to work with so many overachievers, right? And as you put us all indoors, so to speak, you know, there was a lot of extra time to think about, you know, what can we do together? So the 5G Open Innovation Lab, you know, with Amdocs, you know, Expeto, T-Mobile, Microsoft, you know, et cetera, as partners, we were able to think about, you know, what are some application areas we can really focus on. And especially in the pandemic, you know, those problems kind of became front and center for us, right? And it was like, okay, guys, you know, let's put ourselves to work here. So we've done some things, which is we've done a food resiliency lab north of Seattle, which is just, I think, an extraordinary project. And before I even get into, you know, the flying drones and the soil sensors and all these things that are really meaningful, the thing that really stood out to me as we got involved in the project together is the director at Snohomish County, Linda Nunsig, was, you know, she brought up a statistic to me that was just kind of blew my mind about basically the population growth, right? And fundamentally how many people we were going to have to feed. And if you take that with really the inevitability of climate disasters and pandemics and things, we needed to truly create resiliency of our food supply, which was not only large farms, but small farms and geographic, you know, type of, you know, backups for these things. So as we worked with one project with the 5G lab was really taking, you know, a small farm and enabling them to, again, putting, you know, the control in their hands with technology was to get their yields up, to get their farm more efficient, to use fertilizer more efficiently, water more efficiently, all with, you know, that 5G foundational network together with the compute and application resources from members of the lab, you know, Innovate Ag, you know, Amdocs, us, et cetera. And it was really wonderful. And that was just one. And we're looking at, you know, we've done some projects also with a large energy company as we're looking at what I would say grid resiliency, right? Much like food resiliency, but the electrical grid with climate and other wildfire type disasters. How do we enable that grid to be resilient so that, you know, society that's, you know, literally powered by these guys can continue on? But then also some great applications in terms of that we've worked on again with lab members, us, you know, companies like Pano, AI, you know, doing wildfire detection applications, enabling transportation electrification, you know, by, you know, connecting up the charging infrastructure and making sure that it's ready. So, I mean, I could go on and on. It's been a couple of years. We've been busy, Matt.
Well, yes, that's like it. But, you know, this is something that I've picked up this week, and this is a definite theme, is these things, and you've just cited some amazing examples there, Michael, but these use cases, these issues that this technology are addressing and not for pure commercial reasons. They're fixing issues in the world, in society. It's not pure capitalism, right? And you know, when you look at the food resiliency program, something that Don, the CMO of Qualcomm, said to us this week, and he was talking about industrial automation. He said there's hundreds of tankers off the coast of LA right now. They can't get into the port. There's no staff. There's a shortage, a supply chain issue in workers to get those goods off the boats. If we'd already had that automated, which is one of the sort of prophesized use cases of 5G, we wouldn't be having these supply chain shortages in the world we live in, right? So I think what's really interesting about some of the demonstrable examples, the food resiliency program in Snohomish County, these are things that technology is addressing that affects humanity, right? In a rather, you know, it's not something that just makes our lives easier. It's something that's fixing some very fundamental problems that the world is facing right now, which I think is really interesting.
No, I think it's really interesting as well. And, you know, one of the things that I would say, I mean, and I mean this in a very constructive way, but sometimes a crisis is a bit of a wake-up call to remind us that, you know, we're not here, you know, for just pure capitalism, right? It's what can we do to really bring about meaningful change, right? Yeah. And I think that, you know, pandemics, you know, climate-induced, you know, disasters and challenges, that word resiliency really rings true. Mm-hmm. And it's a call to action for all of us to really think about how we can truly take these things and bring them together to drive meaningful outcomes, right, for good. And good doesn't mean that we don't, you know, have to, you know, grow and profit from these things, but I think it gives us a North Star. Yeah. And that North Star, I think, has been inspiring. And I might just add one more thing. I was in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago, and again, one of these things where, you know, we were let out to see each other again and just having coffee. And he made the remark that really stuck with me. And he said, you know, I believe that this pandemic has actually pushed technology 5 years further ahead 100%. Than it would be, because we were literally kind of backed in a corner. And the great thing for me and why I'm, you know, kind of wake up every day to, you know, be a part of this industry is we did not cower away. You know, we stood up, and the past couple of years, you know, again, on Zoom, on Teams, you know, we've come together and really done some amazing things. And to your point about the ports, I think now we want to go further, faster, to kind of put in those safeguards to ensure that, you know, the next time this happens, there's not 40, 50, 100 ships waiting to come into the port. Yeah. And it, you know, is crisis, in these times of crisis, is when the greatest innovation happens, right? And I think the analyst Chetan Sharma, who's from Seattle, and he did his event recently called Quantum Leaps, where he said, never in the history of technology have we had such a deep crisis like COVID, which has forced that digital propulsion and adoption and advancement that we've never seen before. But at the same time, it coincides completely coincidentally with the advent of 5G, edge compute, and all these other technologies coalescing to create this. He calls it a quantum leap. We're in this moment in time, and I'm sure you've been in technology for many years, Michael, but this is an exciting time. All those things coming together to create this huge advance that we're at the vanguard of. It's pretty exciting. It is. You know, it's funny. I was a few weeks ago was listening to an REM song. You probably have heard it called "It's the End of the World as We Know It," right? But you know, this could have gone a couple of different ways, right? To your point about community and really, you know, looking at this thing in the eyes and to really use innovation as a tool. And that's what we did, right? So I think it has been a fun time. And, you know, to your first question about being back here and being with folks, there's kind of a way we're looking at each other saying, you know, we've done some good things here, right?
Precisely. No, precisely. I think there's, I don't know what the word is. The industry feels kinder than it did 2 years ago. There's an altruism, a feeling of humanity that I don't think we had 2 years ago.
No, I agree. It's sometimes you look at everybody almost as a competitor, right? And if they're doing something, we don't look at the good it's doing. We look at the fact that why didn't I do that, right?
Or what's wrong with that? How can I find something at fault with what they've come up with there?
Right. I was asked as a younger company, one of the things that we're doing, to expand is raising money, right? And I'm often peppered with questions, from potential investors. They're like, well, what do you think of, this company? And, well, what's wrong with them? And I'm like, nothing's wrong with them. They're actually doing some really good things and driving outcomes in this niche that are really wonderful and pushing the industry ahead, right?
Yeah.
And to your point about a community and this altruism, but we're over here and we're doing good in this area, right? And it's okay for multiple folks to be doing some good and to root for each other.
Yeah.
And that's if I look back to some of the first Mobile World Congresses way back, I'm showing my age in con.
Yeah. I used to go there.
Yeah, right. And there was this. There was a little bit of kick in our step back then, bouncing around, and there was this thing called 3G. Wow, it was going to be big, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like, and appreciate you saying that. We've all got a bit of a kick in our step, right? And that's good.
Yeah, and I think the biggest advancements will come is through that cooperation and through partnerships. Initiatives like the 5G Open Innovation Lab that brings us all together to solve these real world issues. I think the biggest advancements also come in that collaboration, right? And that cooperation, which, as we said just before, may not have been as easier to do a couple of years ago for all the reasons we discussed.
No, I agree. And hats off to Jim and Kurt and really the founders of the lab, because they have not let this lab, become a battlefield. It's really been, again, a community, and how can we do good together? And frankly, what I would call is a very practical approach to things, right? It's I make the joke a lot, like you remember the New York City corners, the guys with the trench coats that were selling watches and things. And I was joking, hey, you want to buy some 5G, right? And we thought that was, that was success. Hey, someone put up a network, somebody put in an edge node. And to a great extent, it doesn't matter. It's about how we come together with the community of users and what are the outcomes that they're going to drive? What's the practical value? How did we make people safer today with this technology? How did we improve yields? How did we, get 40 more tankers in and unloaded, right, to get needed supplies to the industry? And, gosh, I sure hope that that's the new measuring stick for us, because it's going to continue to be a lot of fun, right?
No, exactly. To make that real impact, I don't think there's anything bigger. So what's next for Expeto now then? Michael, we talked about some of the great things that you've done with the lab and up in Snohomish County and the food resiliency program. What's right ahead of you over the next 6 months?
Well, I'll tell you, in the past couple of years, it's been, we've really been fortunate to be part of the 5G Open Innovation Lab. We've actually kicked off a wonderful project with Rogers up in Canada. And we've spent a good amount of time readying Rogers, what they call their wireless private network offer. And Rogers is really leaning in, and they're offering not just network, but they're leaning into the compute and the applications layer and going to the mining and the energy industry. So, kind of what's next for us is we've been busy
with that one.
Yeah. So we're looking forward with Rogers of, making some announcements of some projects we're working on, again, really promoting the outcomes, safety, asset use, efficiency, all the things that really make a difference. And we also are moving into some new verticals, some connected car applications, and again, looking more in the safety and service dispatch and these sorts of things. And then also to, again, some industrial applications, again, safety, being first and resiliency. So those are some things ahead, and I wish I could tell you more because they're at the tip of my tongue.
But
we'll look forward to maybe meeting again.
I was going to say, we'll invite you back for a full episode of The Great Indoors, because it's fascinating, Michael, some of the things you're working on and some of the things you're discussing. It's super interesting. And I think this event is a milestone, I think. And I think there's so much that I'm going to take away from this event, but I think this, and speaking to you reinforces it more, this inherent almost obligation and responsibility to a greater good now I think this industry is serving, and I think that's what's really, really exciting.
No, I agree, and we've brought up some authors, and it's always fun to get a little bit philosophical, right? But if we think about Sun Tzu, right, the best way to avoid a bad situation, right, is not to put ourselves in one, right? And I think that as we anticipate more and more challenges coming to us, I think that there's this notion of being very proactive and not waiting to react, because it's that proactiveness that really preserves, the safety and, to a great extent, kind of this engine that we all rely on to kind of move through each day. Yeah. And to your point, having that as a North Star, having that as a call to action, and altruistically working together to put this technology for practical good, man, that's a good way to get up in the morning.
Definitely. Listen, it's been a pleasure having you on The Great Indoors today, Michael. I wish you a safe trip back to your home, and I look forward to having another discussion with you in the future where we can talk about some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been wonderful. Thank you, and maybe hopefully soon we'll be rebranding to The Great Outdoors.
I think so.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next guest on The Great Indoors on day 2 of MWC LA today is the head of product from GenXComm, Ben Posthuma. Ben, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about GenXComm, because we're part of the 5G Open Innovation Lab together at Amdocs and GenXComm, and we talked about our common friend Jim Brisimitzis earlier. But tell us a little bit about GenXComm and what you guys do, and what you also bring to the partnership we have in the lab.
Absolutely. So GenXComm was founded about 5 years ago, and it was based out of some research work being done at the University of Texas, and that research work was done in photonics compute-based interference cancellation. And what that basically means is the research was looking at ways to take transmitting signals, reduce the interference those transmitting signals are emitting, and then be able to still listen on that same channel. So effectively, you can transmit and receive on the exact same frequencies with the exact same radio set.
Right.
That went along for several years doing some various DoD-funded work. Some more R&D went into it. A lot of R&D went into photonics-based processing and some other offshoot programs. But about 8 to 12 months ago, the company really started looking at how do we start productizing this now? And the whole space they wanted to get into was this idea of private networks. So we right now, our main product is a private 4G or 5G network with a mesh capability. What I mean by that is typically when you build a private LTE or 5G network, what you're doing is you have a core and you have your small cells or your remote radios somewhere else. And those are generally connected back into the core. It's sort of a hub and spoke topology.
Yeah.
What we're doing is we're taking the concept of mesh networks and we're able to, rather than connecting those small cells with wired interfaces, we now connect them wirelessly over the air using the same spectrum that we're using for the private network. Right. In our case, it's CBRS. And so we are offering the user side of the network in CBRS, but we're also offering the backhaul in that same frequency set. But because of our interference cancellation technology, we're not losing any of the bandwidth available, and we're not losing any of the efficiencies. Right. So now what you can create is you can create this very, very dense private network that's very, very flexible and very modifiable. You can add nodes, you can remove nodes, and you can effectively very simply cover a large space with ultra-reliable, ultra-dense coverage without the need to run a lot of infrastructure.
Right. So it allows a more efficient, faster rollout, if you will, of those private enterprise networks.
Precisely. And we're taking that whole network and we're bundling that up and we're offering it as a service. So our main play is a network as a service We offer the ability to subscribe to this network, and we do the management with our platform, or as an MSP or other external group can come in, tie into our platform, and then they can host and run all the management on their own. But the idea is it's all service-based.
And so who is your customer? Is your customer the service providers of the world like Verizon? So you would offer them this capability when they deploy a private enterprise network for their enterprise customer base? Or do you go directly to the enterprise and say, hey, you know what, we'll take care of this whole thing for you?
It is more of the former, in that we're doing more of a B2B type. So we'll work with a installer, we'll work with a managed service provider. We will give them the technology. We will license our platform off to them. They will bring in their NOC and their customer support element and their BSS. They'll do all that side of it. We license off the platform for the management of the network, and then they manage the network.
Right. And it's fair to say that I think one of the biggest buzzwords, I wouldn't say buzzwords, just one of the biggest words in the industry we work in right now, and it's 3 words, is private enterprise network.
Yes,
right? Everybody's
absolutely.
talking about this now, talking about it in relation to 5G, talking about it in relation to all those 5G B2B use cases that we've speculated about, prophesized about, dreamt about for years. Are you seeing it now really become a reality? Are you seeing it accelerate? Are you seeing the demand from a dynamics perspective, industry-wise? What are you seeing pre-pandemic, and also has anything happened because of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because as you identified, pre-pandemic and only 3 or 4 years ago, I remember being in Barcelona for MWC probably 3 or 4 years ago. And even then we were still talking about, is this 5G really a thing? Is it really just marketing? And everybody's talking about, the 3 tenets of 5G, the, ultra low latency and, reliability and massive machine type, and then the enhanced mobile broadband. Those were kind of the gospel of 5G.
Yeah.
And that's all we talked about. And we had some use cases around that, but nobody was really taking that the step further. And then left a lot of industry to kind of wonder, well, maybe this is something, but it's down the road, so let's not invest in it. Now that we're post-pandemic and several years later, now you really start to see people picking up on that. The ecosystem has yet to follow. There is an ecosystem out there, but it is still very, very developmental.
Yeah.
But conceptually, enterprises all over the place, from what we're seeing, are absolutely gravitating towards this idea of a private 5G network for, the promises that I just mentioned. The biggest thing right now for an enterprise is the ability to connect all of their devices, M2M type devices, or even, handhelds and things like that, to this very, very secure and reliable network. That's not something that you got with 4G. That's not something you get with Wi-Fi. It's a much, much deeper type of a network application.
So one of the driving forces then for the demand in private enterprise networks in this instance is security.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Security is a very, very big thing. And so enterprises are looking to be able to manage security on their own. They want to hold that. They want to understand that. They're reluctant to give that over to some other entity, whether it's an MSP or a carrier or something like that. And so with a private network, not only do you get all the access and availability to the data that you collect and use on your network, but you also get the ability to overlay your own applications. And one of those applications becomes security. So now you can have your own security platform, whether it's device security or network security or data security. You can have all that controlled in-house effectively through a platform that you don't have to bring up. So it's the as-a-service model for security and applications in the network.
No, it's really interesting, and of course, security is important to the enterprise. But I was always under the illusion that the private enterprise network was about just securing that bandwidth. Right? No one else is going to drain my bandwidth. This is ours, right? This isn't going to, and then we can do some interesting stuff with it. But you raise a really interesting point there, and we've talked about security several times today, and the multitude of new entry points for nefarious people or institutions that are trying to obviously find their way in as we move more and more to this connected world. So I think that's really interesting. Now, given what you guys do and the customers you work with, what's one of the interesting use cases you've seen so far in a private enterprise network? We were just talking about Schneider Electric and their automation in their industrial plants. From your perspective, Ben, what have you seen that's pretty interesting and out there, and you've thought, wow, it's cool to be a part of that?
I think that, a lot of what we're going after right now is kind of in that next generation of, who are the people who are bringing these new use cases in from an enterprise perspective. I think that the one thing that always makes me kind of stop and think that, man, I'm glad to be working in this business is the idea of agriculture technology or connected ag in general. And this is a lot of what the 5G Open Innovation Lab has been doing up in the farms in Washington and things like that is you've got incredibly innovative people building these tools where you can, measure soil quality, you can measure the amount of water in the soil, you can measure how the crops are doing, and you can very, very tactically treat the crops exactly the right way. You reduce the amount of people needed, and more importantly, you reduce the amount of resources needed. So less water, less fertilizer, less other things that are a drain on the rest of our environment. So with that technology, of course, they all need to be connected, and they all need to be connected, almost like an M2M type scenario. It's exactly that. And so by being able to put out a private 5G network and connect all these innovative technologies and really be able to do something with that data, again, doing it on premises. We have compute power local in this network. We're not shipping that out somewhere to process. We can process it all locally, and it stays within that enterprise or that farm owner's data set. And so now we can really turn around some pretty significant improvements in something that's, obviously a global need, and that's food production.
Yeah. No, and I remember when the press release went out on the food resiliency program up in Snohomish County, and we did a podcast with Jim that day. We put it out that day to support that initiative. And what I thought was really amazing about it was this is a real demonstrable use case that's out there now, that we're proving out, we're showing the value. We've talked about it for years, right? But there it is. Here's an example, boom. And I think what's really interesting, and you probably had this, is the United States, I think, is ahead the rest of the world in 5G right now and looking at this, which hasn't always been the case in the past. But there was, different areas of the world have gone first in certain things. But I think what we're seeing now are people from the rest of the world, from our customers in Europe or Asia or South America, sitting up and going, whoa, what did you do?
That's right.
And we're all at different paces, and we're all at different levels. But the amount of interest that I know Jim is getting and the 5G Open Innovation Lab and us is from outside of the United States, where other countries that are in different place with their 5G journey saying, okay, now you're starting to spark things up for us. So I think that must have been a great thing to see and to even be a part of. And what do you see moving forward? What are the new things beyond that? I think the food resiliency program is a great one, but what other things do you think you can enable or you've seen?
I think one of the other really big things coming out of, the pandemic taught us a lot of things. Those of us in the technological fields, we recognize that, very, very dramatically, people across the world have had to rely on communications in a very, very different way. Suddenly, within a day, we all had to going back to, going from a very, very secure and trusted enterprise network at our workplaces to now going into our home networks and still expected to perform the same functions with a far, in some cases, far more degraded type networks. We've also seen, a dramatic increase in the digital divide, particularly as it goes to education. We've seen a lot of students, not be able to get connected in different areas, or if you can get connected, students learn in different ways. And even if you do have that digital connection, that learning may not be targeted to a specific student. And so we've seen those things grow. There's been a lot of innovations around those industries. There's been huge innovations in the way that people communicate remotely. Going into a restaurant, you scan a QR code and order off a menu now and pay from your phone and never have to interact with the person again. And those things all happen very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Where I see this going from the enterprise perspective, though, is if you look at factories and productions and even agriculture, people are one of the biggest resources. And so because there's such a shortage of people right now, there's such a shortage of availability to get people to work in the factories, to work in the farms. automation is becoming something that's very, very rapidly increasing.
Yeah.
And so when you look to automation, you look at machines that need to communicate very, very quickly and very reliably and very precisely.
Yeah.
And so that's what private 5G can do for you, is now you can start taking some of those elements that we've been talking about for years with network function virtualization and slicing and things like that. And you can make this really, really reliable network to improve automation across many, many manufacturing sectors, agriculture sectors, and a lot of other places to reduce the demand for people in factories.
You've just sparked something that's made me think about this. If you remember pre-pandemic, when we talked about automation, everyone started throwing up Terminator scenarios. We'll be replaced by robots. There'll be mass unemployment. If you remember this, I remember an article I read in The Economist, the rise of the robots, and we're all going to be taken over by machines, etc. But when you look at it now, we need those machines and robots.
Absolutely.
Because the labor force has completely displaced, has changed beyond all recognition. There's 500 tankers off the coast of LA that can't get into the port because there's not the workers there to take the goods off the ships. Most of the hotels in LA don't have the staff to clean your rooms and offer all these different things. So I don't think it's a case anymore. I don't think people should be fearful of automation in any enterprise now. I think it's a necessity. I think it has to happen in order for us to continue our lives, right?
100%. And that's one of the big things that private 5G is teaching us, is that, because these things are a necessity and because it's no longer looked at as this kind of scary, some other thing taking over for us, but now it is very much a necessity for robots to be able to perform the same functions in what could be considered an unsafe workspace for humans.
Yeah.
We are seeing now that the existing infrastructure in these places, like Wi-Fi and other networks, just simply aren't suitable. This is why, so many of those use cases in 5G were developed years ago. This is why those were hashed out and talked about. Now we finally see the true application, not in a scary robots are taking over way, but in a very exciting, innovative. This is kind of the future, and now the human capital can be focusing on other things, whereas now we can start offloading some of the manufacturing sector and some of those other things to more robotics and devices.
Excellent. Okay. Well, listen, Ben, it's been great to have you on The Great Indoors today. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd like to welcome my next guest on The Great Indoors this afternoon. His name is James Kimery. He's the VP of Product Management at Spirent. James, welcome to The Great Indoors.
Thanks, man. Good to meet you.
And I think this is a significant milestone for us as an industry and as people in coming back to some level of normalcy going forward. I think that's what I love about it. And what have you seen or heard at the event? I know we're only halfway through day 2 right now, but what stood out from you from a keynote perspective or anybody you've spoken to? What's really stuck with you so far?
That's a really good question. There's so many things that I was able to see since I've been here. Like I said, I've been involved in a few of the sessions and some of the talks. I think in general, I hate to say this, but I think people are still coming to grips on what 5G is, right? Mm-hmm. And I've had some really good questions, like when is the promise of 5G going to actually be real? There was questions on this thing called Open RAN. Is that going to be the driver that makes the promise of 5G come to life? But my opinion is 5G is really hard. Mm-hmm. And it's and that's not an excuse, but it's hard. And some of the things that the operators want to try to accomplish with this new G and communications, it's not just about mobile broadband data. It's not about good voice quality. It's about everything else. And there's a lot of things that have to be put in place from a business perspective, a technical perspective, in order for 5G to realize that promise. Yeah. But I think that's the thing that's I step back and look, what's happened in a couple of years. Well, 2 years ago, 5G was being rolled out. There was a lot of excitement, the COVID pandemic happened, and people are still worried, are still wanting 5G, which is a good thing, and they want all the benefits now. And I work at Spirent. Spirent is a company that works with operators on the deployment of 5G. So I can promise you it's coming.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about that. There's been this propulsion of digitalization and this desire for connectivity that we've never seen before. And I think it's sharpened the appetite for 5G. And what I think is really interesting is that, 3 or 4 years ago, when you talked about 5G, you said, well, what's going to be, everyone's speculating about the use case. Really, in reality, fixed wireless access is the priority right now for the service providers, or as I see it. But that no longer is, oh, really? Is that all we're going to do with it? Because connectivity has become more important than ever before because of the pandemic. The digital divide had a light shone on it like a spotlight like never before. So therefore, people it doesn't matter if it's just about connectivity right now, because that is super important. Now, all the other good stuff I think will come further down the line, but that's one of the things that I've picked up. It's okay. Rural coverage, fixed wireless, that's okay. It doesn't have to all be about driverless cars and all of this stuff. So tell me a little bit about Spirent, James, and what you do there, what's happened there during the pandemic, and what you see moving forward.
Well, that's a good question. So I'm a vice president of product management. There are 3 business units at Spirent. There's position, navigation, and timing. There's cloud and IP, and then mine, which is lifecycle service assurance, or LSA. I'm just going to use LSA for short because more efficient. But I'm a VP in that business unit. I'm responsible. There's 2 sections to the business. There's the live part and the lab. And I'm in charge of all of our lab business and the LSA business unit. And what that means, if you think about, 5G, a lot of these 5G technologies have to be proven in the lab first. Once they're proven in the lab, then they go to live, where they're actually deployed. And we've built up a nice service assurance business. So whenever 5G gets rolled out, they deploy it. Operator wants to measure the performance, service level performance. They need a service assurance sort of solution for that. So that's the BU, our strategy. It's worth mentioning that our strategy, we have a lab to live strategy. So we use the same tools and technologies that we're developing in the lab to prove these 5G technologies in their nascent form. And you use the same tools and technologies as they're being rolled out and being monitored.
All right. And so what have you done? What's changed during the pandemic in how you do your day-to-day? Have things accelerated out of control, or what's the general trend in that environment?
So how much time do we have?
We could do another episode later on, don't worry.
Sorry, I had to ask. Well, you were mentioning about the pandemic and, use cases and things on the show. I'm going to start there, then I'll transition to Spirent later. But this fellow from Schneider Electric, he has technicians and factories, they do factory automation and that type of thing. This was a story he shared publicly, so hopefully he doesn't mind me resharing it. But he said that AR and VR, one of the promises of 5G has been, this XR technology, either augmented reality or virtual reality. He claims that they actually took advantage of 5G because they couldn't effectively get a lot of people in these factories where they were automating, and then if they did, because they didn't have as much support, this augmented reality that tools that they were using actually were lifesavers, because they could actually guide the technicians and building up the factory and the automation aspects. Remotely. So I thought that was quite interesting. Yeah. Where the pandemic actually accelerated a 5G, KPI or use case. Yeah. And then in my personal, just in terms of, personal, I actually moved to Spirent from a company called National Instruments NI in August of 2020. Right. So I actually made a transition during, it wasn't lockdown, but effectively lockdown. And I made the decision that I was going to work remotely. I'd been working in an office for 20 plus years, and that's been quite an adjustment. And I think Spirent realized that, hey, we're in a pandemic. We're going to have to get used to working, remotely and effectively remotely. I think that's the key word, effectively remotely. So, my day now is more or less a lot of conference calls, one after the other. That's why it's so great to get out and be here in LA. But a lot of conference calls, in the way that we do business, a lot of times we sort of took it for granted that, hey, I'm going to see this person at this trade show or at this conference, I'll set up a trip. And, that face-to-face is where, the gaps are sort of filled in on business opportunities, applications, technical knowledge. It's really hard to write an email that has everything in it. And it's also really hard, even in a video call, to get some of the contextual information.
No, absolutely.
Especially if you're visiting customers and you see their real world challenges where they're trying to do something. You only see their face during the call, but when you actually go on-prem and you actually see what they're trying to do, you go, I understand.
Yeah.
So trying to get that information via conference call into Spirent and trying to act on it and servicing our customers has been a challenge. But, I hate to say it, but we're getting pretty good at it right now.
Good. And, it throws in, everybody's kind of adapted to different things, right? And like you said, the adoption of working from home effectively. Our previous guest just a little while ago, Roy, was talking about the expectations on your consumer broadband now is very different in 18 months, right? Now if we're working at home, if we're reliant on that connectivity, our expectations have gone to enterprise level.
Right.
We want resilience, we want assurance, we want security, right? With and he said something really interesting, and that is when your employer provides that enterprise level connectivity at your home, that's like a benefit.
Yes, it is.
Right?
Yes.
A taxable benefit, for if you want to look at it that way. But I thought that was really, really interesting. So what do you see happening next? One of the questions I like to ask our guests is, what do they think the next big, or the most impactful 5G use cases? And nobody knows for sure, right? This is a crystal ball, but it's interesting to get people's perspectives. Because like I said at the beginning, when people have been talking about 5G for years, you couldn't hear one conversation that didn't drop in driverless cars with all the autonomous vehicles. But from your perspective, and you talked about industrial automation there as well, what do you see as a big B2B or consumer 5G use case that you would like to see?
Well, I think all of the use cases that have been discussed or proposed for 5G, I think they're all important. The question is one going to drive more revenue or more economic expansion than or growth than others? And, I'm not sure. I'll be honest with you. One of the things that Spirent did during the pandemic, and as a result of the pandemic, we bought a Wi-Fi company.
Oh, right.
And one of the reasons we bought a Wi-Fi company was because everybody's relying on Wi-Fi now, not 5G. And then we also have a vision of Wi-Fi and 5G working together. And if you think about it, people talk about private networks and 5G. That's a lot of discussion at the show, and it's a great use case. One of the challenges that I personally wonder about, what about the smaller enterprises? What about the home office? How is their Wi-Fi connectivity? Most of, $100 access point or whatever they purchase the access point for. How has that been tested? What level of service is that going to be for consumers in that type of environment? And then finally, why can't 5G be the broadband delivery mechanism for those small enterprises, like your fixed wireless example, but taking it to a step further and providing a scenario where Wi-Fi and 5G work together to actually give you better coverage in a small office or home office sort of environment. Yeah. I wonder if that's one of the areas. And I know for us, we invested in Wi-Fi. We're hugely invested in 5G. Don't get me wrong. But one of the things that we saw is if you look at how the industry evolved with cellular, the testing and the investments in cellular are really pretty big compared to Wi-Fi. Yeah. I'll just say it that way. And then if you look at giving a certain level of service, with cellular, your cellular devices and base stations and all that, they've been tested to a number of different standards before it even hits the commercial shelves. Wi-Fi, it's not the case. Yeah. And you can see that there'll be a leveling. And then for areas, you can just tell that 5G will be a great delivery mechanism for Wi-Fi or even 5G. Yeah. Private networks, small enterprises as well as big enterprises.
Now, and one thing is that I know that Spirent, like us, Amdocs, we're both part of the 5G Open Innovation Lab out of Seattle. Right. We had Jim Brisimitzis on yesterday, the founder and CEO of the 5G Open Innovation Lab. He's awesome. A great guy. It's the second time we've had him on the podcast. And I'm just starting to think of something. Is we had Don, the CMO of Qualcomm, on earlier, and he talked about off the coast of LA, there's all these tankers out in the ocean. Right? There's big supply chain issues across the world right now because of employees, the Great Resignation, that have moved into different areas because of the pandemic. And he said that, and it was a great point, and you've just made me think of it again, is if there was a 5G, if that existed already, the ability to automate those ports, right, which I know we're looking at with the 5G Open Innovation Lab, right, we wouldn't have that problem right now. So it's almost like there's problems that have been thrown up during the pandemic, and that's a great example, which need a use case.
That's right. That's right.
That are in process, that are being delivered. And I think that's what we're going to see as well. Some of these, when I look at fixed wireless access and rural coverage, it's become, as I said at the beginning, more important than ever because of the digital divide, which the pandemic shone a light on. So I think all these things are almost symbiotic, and they're all sort of fitting into place as we
I think so too.
Forward.
That was actually, you said it better than I did, but I do. I think these, these technologies are sort of finding their way. And what is it? The term necessity is the mother of invention. Yeah. The pandemic has sort of put a light on some of the gaps that we have in our infrastructure and our systems. And, 5G is here. It really is. Yeah. It's here. Yeah. Wi-Fi is here. I'm part of a testing company, and I can say, if you have the right testing partner, those dreams can become realities.
Well, and the other thing is, right now, we're in the United States anyway, there is this race to 5G. The race is on, and one of our previous guests said it's very much a marketing race, right? And you know who I'm talking about. They're throwing around their coverage figures. There was the C-band auction that brought Verizon back in, T-Mobile like gung-ho and going for it. So there's this race going on right now. I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but Spirent is a key part of that race if you're testing these things before they go to deployment, right?
Absolutely. I can't get into our customers, but we've said this publicly. Some of our largest customers are some of the largest operators. So we're on the front lines of these 5G deployments. And, I think that it's coming. I think the C-band auction was a big driver for the United States. I think people step back and it's a very simple equation. It's bandwidth and data rates, or spectrum, and spectrum equals bandwidth, which equals data rates. More spectrum, more bandwidth, more higher data rates. I mean, it's really that simple. Yeah. And there really wasn't 2 years ago. There really wasn't a lot of spectrum. I mean, there was a lot in the millimeter wave bands. Millimeter wave is sort of a different animal, and I think it'll come. I just don't think the technology is quite there yet. But really, for the FR1 or sub-6 gigahertz use cases, there just wasn't a lot of spectrum. Yeah. Now there is, and I think operators are going full bore to try to deliver the promise of 5G to their customers.
Yeah.
And then you even have companies like Dish, which are greenfield operators,
Yeah.
and they are taking advantage of the cloudification. One of the things that 5G did is they made these open interfaces in the core, and so the core network could actually be virtualized. And then that means that these core elements could be hosted on different cloud servers, private, public, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of having proprietary systems that were in an operator's data center, that's a really radical paradigm shift, and it's really radical in terms of how you test.
Yeah.
And so that's where Spirent's been. We've been involved with the front lines of the cloudification of the 5G core.
Yeah.
We're really excited about that because the operating cost of the operators goes down dramatically if they can take advantage of the cloud. They get a much richer offering in terms of features that they can offer their customers, and then they can stretch in terms of capacity, location, geography, taking advantage of the cloud's disparate, deployments. So it's pretty exciting. I won't say, we talk about the use cases, and now I'm talking about the implementation and how the sausage is made, so to speak. But those things are really necessary to get to that endpoint.
Yeah. Well, listen, James, it's been a pleasure having you on. I've really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Wow, that was a lot of great conversation. In fact, we've never had so many great guests crammed into one episode. Whew. But these innovators are inventing, defining, and delivering solutions that will clearly help mankind overcome the biggest challenges we've ever faced. This is special stuff, and something we should be proud of. Proud to just be a part of it. So please subscribe to our podcast on all the usual podcast channels. Leave a review or rating if you feel so inclined. It certainly helps us. Check out 2 other Amdocs podcasts that are brilliant and available now: The Future of Tech with Avishai Charlin and Points of View with our CMO, Gil Rosen. Also visit our website, amdocs.com/The Great Indoors, where we have a treasure trove of assets related to the series. Now, we'll be back next week for another Los Angeles special edition of The Great Indoors. I'm Matt Roberts for Amdocs in LA, and have a great day wherever you are.